Once again, a very warm welcome to everyone attending here, to everyone online, and to our wonderful speakers today for this forum, the Eastern Mediterranean, NATO, US Faces, and Fossil Imperialism Out, organized by Resist Europe. This forum brings together anti-war, environmental justice, and anti-imperialist activists to discuss US and NATO militarization and bases in the region, including the connection of militarization to rampant resource extraction and fossil imperialism. We will also discuss organizing strategies to resist US-NATO war-making and plunder of resources. It's really great to be gathering in person after almost 2 whole years. It's been 2 years since the last Manifesta happened, and now we're here again. And we're so happy to be able to do this event in hybrid form with many more attendees joining us online. Great to have you here. And now about the program, we're going to start with a plenary session of 5 speakers addressing different issues around imperialism in the East Med, followed by a short Q&A. And then we'll have a breakout groups. We're going to split the breakout groups between the online participants and the on-site participants, and that's to discuss what we've heard today, and we have some guiding questions also to think about strategy and how we can continue collaborating together in our anti-imperialist resistance. After the plenary session, after the breakout groups, we will come back and have short reports from each group. And then we'll have some closing remarks, and then we'll close the session. Just some house rules. So we are here in Ostend in Belgium and following the Belgian law around COVID, which means you can not have your mask off once you're seated, but keep 1.5 meter distance. And once you're moving around the room, wear your mask, please. There are refreshments available for a small fee at the back of the room. And for the online folks, please keep your mic muted during the program. Please use the chat box to tell us where you're joining from, who you are, and to leave comments and questions for the Q&A session. And yeah, that's all the house stuff. So let's begin. Let's begin, yes. And to begin, we have some words from Cody Urban and Rafael Augusta Miranda, and they're from the Global Secretariat of Resist US-Led War. They're going to talk to us about the work of Resist US-led war and the current campaigns that we are waging and engaged in. So over to you, Cody and Raf.
Thank you so much for the introduction. We're very happy to be here today with all of you. And so I'm going to open up with just some brief comments about who Resist is. And then I'll pass it off to Cody, who will talk a little bit about the importance of this event and the importance of building the Resist US-led war movement. So as mentioned, we are from the Resist US-led war movement Secretariat. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. And Resist formed in 2017 during a conference called Solidarity and Fight Back, Resisting US-led War, Militarism, and Neo-Fascism, which was held at the University of Toronto and included 250 participants from 21 countries. You can go to the next slide, please. So the Resist US-led war movement is a broad global network united around a manifesto that was drafted at the conference entitled For a Just Peace, Resist US-led War. The network aims to go beyond the participants of the conference and contribute towards strengthening a global mass movement against US-led imperialist war and militarism by encouraging coordination and cooperation amongst anti-war and peace groups across the globe. And so for folks who are here today who may not be part of Resist yet, In order to join, you would just go to the website resistusledwarmovement.com, and you could sign on to that manifesto and become a part of the global network. Next slide, please. And our central calls are: one, to resist US-led war and militarism, which includes advocating and calling for the withdrawal of US military troops, bases, the war games and exercises, an end to NATO, AFRICOM, counterinsurgency plans, proxy wars, and other covert interventions, an end to Zionism, apartheid, and systemic racism, and ending the spending on US military industrial complex, which includes the divestment from the industry and putting that money towards people's needs, development, and infrastructure. And our second central call is to build just peace, in building solidarity across people's movements for social equity. We also recognize the right of the people to self-determination, to economic and food sovereignty, to self-defense of nations and oppressed peoples from reactionary aggression and violence. And we aim to build peace through genuine sustainable development, job creation, and the health and well-being of our communities. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Cody, who will talk a little bit more. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rafa. And really thank you to everyone who's here today, both everyone currently in Belgium, but also all of our other attendees around the world tuning in from all the different time zones around the world virtually. So going off of what Raphael was saying about this movement globally, this specific conference could not be coming at a more crucial time. As you can see here, this is a map of not just US bases in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also joint military exercises, military agreements, and even drone strikes. So you can see just how saturated the Eastern Mediterranean is with US-led war and militarism. Through NATO, the US drags European and other North Atlantic states into its global strategy, which we've seen recently in Afghanistan, but also been seeing for decades, has been in a spiraling collapse. So even as the US is committing itself and its allies to the so-called pivot to Asia, as it tries to move the majority of its troops to the Asia Pacific, it gives full support to the most fascist allies in the region, such as Turkey's Erdogan, as you can see right here. And at the same time, the climate crisis is devastating our planet and communities, all while fossil fuel corporations are fervently beating the war drums to maintain the endless wars for oil and gas. A massive amount of these reserves are still found in the Eastern Mediterranean. Therefore, this fossil imperialism is a driving force behind the continued buildup of US, NATO, and other allied military states' might, especially spiraling terror, fascism, human rights violations, and theft of lands across the region. We have to end this system if we're going to have a future. Just and lasting peace is nothing abstract. It's a matter of survival on this planet. So today, you're going to hear from anti-militarist and self-determination struggles from Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, Kurdistan, the Netherlands, and many other countries in both the speaking lineup as well as the breakout groups to follow. This shows us how strong our networks already are, but they have to be stronger. So moving forward for today, help us build the Resist US-led war movement in Europe. Now that the US war machine is more overstretched than ever, let's take advantage of this and end it. Now is the time to unite and fight for just peace in every corner of the world. Thank you so much for being here, everyone.
So I'm very happy to introduce our first on-site speaker, who is joining us all the way from Egypt, which is really great that you came all that way. And that is Mamdou Habashi. And Mamdou is an Egyptian architect and civil engineer, a member of Politburo of the Socialist Popular Alliance Party, SPA, and head of its international office, vice president of the World Forum for Alternatives in Dakar, WFA and board member of the Arab and African Research Center in Cairo.
The crisis of global capitalism has entered its destructive phase, and it does not see a way out of that except by waging wars and dismantling nations everywhere with an ever-increasing dose of lies, hypocrisy, and destruction of consciousness and all parts of the earth. The former UN General Secretary, Ban Ki-moon, once said, "The world is overarmed." According to CIPRI, you know CIPRI, this institute in Stockholm, who's observing the situation of arms and military expenditures all over the world. 15% of the world population now accounts for 75% of military expenditures. Thus, it is not the world, but the West is overarmed. This is the substantial indication which proves the intention of imperialism to control the world by military means. Despite the homogeneity and consensus that the imperialist powers acquired after World War II, as they together formed what Samir Amin called collective imperialism, now, after 4 decades of their final victory, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the stage of the unipolar world, this homogeneity has begun to show cracks and contradictions. The image of a new multipolar world is beginning to unfold. Unfortunately, such a world still lacks the influence of the forces that can stand against the war in terms of their struggle against imperialism. If we look at humanity as a whole, we may find that 99.9999% of humanity is, in principle, against wars. Nevertheless, the idea of imperialism, its direct connection with wars, and the relation between imperialism and the crisis of capitalism have not yet reached even a significant minority of the peoples. Therefore, we find that the 21st century is witnessing a terrifying increase in the danger of war, and not other way around, as many imagined after the collapse of the Soviet Union. With their long history of subordination to imperialist centers, the despotic rulers, tormentors of their people, have turned the Middle East region into the weakest spot in the world. The Middle East is therefore the most likely candidate to ignite all kinds of wars. For decades, the West exerts every day more pressure on Iran with the accusation of risks from its military aggression, although Iran's military expenditures are less than half of Israel's, including atomic weapons. No one in the West dares to mention that, despite all the aggression the world has witnessed through Israel. So the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Emirates, have funded the Islamic militia who have almost destroyed Syria since 2011. This is similar to this scene we have been witnessing in Libya in the past 15 years. For a decade, the entire world has been watching the worst human disaster in Yemen without being able to stop this criminal war. The US posted governor in Iraq, Mr. Bremer, had turned the country into a complete chaos, a permanent civil war. 50 years ago, Egypt was the most influential country in the region in terms of liberation and the non-allied movement. Yes, that is the better, after the defeat of the 2011 uprising, and I call it uprising, not revolution like everybody means to call, the regime in Egypt is trying to prove to the West that it is the better servant for their interests and strategies. Thus, the so-called international community, that means the G7, does not see any human rights violations and integrates this regime in its military activities, making it immune against its critics, although it is driving the country into the abyss. I mean, let us say, in last July, Egypt has joined the military maneuver in the Black Sea against the Russian to the south of the Crimea. What does Egyptian military to do with this problem? I mean, this is the way how they want to integrate the regime into the imperialist camp to be a part of. So anyway, however, the latest example is Afghanistan. Everybody knows. NATO forces led by the United States with the participation of forces from similar Western countries have withdrawn from Afghanistan after 20 years of war and occupation. They leave behind a devastated country, and they are the sole bearers of responsibility for war crimes that have claimed the lives of 10,000s of civilians. As for all the statements by the military and politicians, militaries and politicians from the various warring parties to the effect that they now regret the sudden and unexpected progress of Taliban, and that they have misjudged the situation. They are nothing but hypocrisy and blurring of the facts of history. The radical Islamic Taliban movement which now holds the power in Afghanistan, was originally funded by the United States and NATO, and mainly trained in camps in Pakistan. NATO, the United States of America, the Federal Republic of Germany, the United Kingdom, and other countries of the West have never been interested in human rights and development in the region. The US military mission was not concerned with the war against terrorism and securing human rights, as the US put out in announcements and rumors. They prepared armies of multinational multinational Takfiri militias. I hope you understand what does mean Takfiri militias, but I didn't find a translation of the word. These are the Islamic militias that They have the base ideology to make the rest of the world blasphemic. And therefore, they declare the rest of the world the war. This is the base of terrorism. We can talk about this perhaps later, but I have read it in many other texts as takfiri, because I mean, the European, they didn't find a translation for such a stupid word. No. Yes. They prepared armies of multinational takfiri militias, which were put in service of their schemes to inflame religious, sectarian, and ethnic conflicts for the sake of fragmentation, dismantlement, and civil wars in the countries of the region, and in order to export that to the Chinese, Russian, Iranian, and Arab interior. The ultimate goal was to deflect attention from the nature of the conflict, the principal struggle in our world being against imperialism, by re-inscribing it as a clash of civilizations and cultures, and not a struggle between the centers of the world against its peripheries, a struggle between the global north and the global south, a struggle of the strong against the weak. NATO's 20-year war mission in Afghanistan was not about human rights. It was about military geostrategic locations, access to trade routes, and raw materials. It was about the siege of Russian Federation and regime change in Iran, the subjugation of the whole region, and the destruction of any development that contravenes imperialist interest. In 2010, German President Köhler was forced to resign because he inadvertently exposed Germany's true rulers. He had stated openly that, quotation, military operations are necessary to secure economic interests. Therefore, he had to leave. The United States did not withdraw its forces from the country voluntarily, but rather because the war in Afghanistan cannot be won or financed in the long run. Moreover, given that the international situation has acquired different features, American strategic priorities have likewise changed. As early as 2017, the US national security strategy considered the People's Republic of China to be a strategic competitor. At the G7 summit in June of this year, Biden tried to restore this discipline in his disintegrating camp and consolidate his ranks behind his leadership to make China the arch enemy of all, not only the United States. That is the first task today for the United States and its allies to prevent the rise of China as a global from Afghanistan, to build a fortress against China in the Pacific. This of the episodes of the decline of the single dominant American pole and the entry into a stage of the multipolar world. This American decline is reflected in our region in the problems it creates for its allies and subordinates. An existential predicament for the Zionist occupation entity, and the rise of the revolutionary popular alternatives to this inflamed reality. The ideology of political Islam in all its varieties, which has dominated the image of resistance for 40 years, has also entered the phase of decline. Necessary generates takfir and terrorist created the Taliban have been nurturing it to this day. I didn't find a better translation for the word Weltanschauung, but it is also accepted in English and in French, the Americans. Anyway, the American defeat made way for a new expansion of it. It is a kiss of life and terrorist groups. The humiliating imperialist withdrawal from Afghanistan does not negate the criminal scheme it planned to mire the region in chaos and terrorism. The Taliban was always in the service of imperialism and will remain so in the future, even if it seems today to occupy the position of resistance. Thank you. About the rest of the region, sorry, just to close. That means the other problems, I will name just them, and to talk about them, we may use the discussion. We have the problems of the gas discoveries in the East Mediterranean and the results of that, the intervention, the military intervention of Turkey. We have the problems of the new dam in Ethiopia, and what does this mean for the region? We have also the problem of Afghanistan, as we said, and in Syria, and in Iraq, and in Libya, and in Algeria, and in Tunisia, and so in Egypt, and last but not least, in Palestine. So almost the entire region is burning, and a very complex picture is now to be discussed, but it cannot be included in such a base ideological thing. Let's talk about every single case alone, separately. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mamdouh, for that very insightful and expansive overview of the different situations in the different regions and nations, and especially your contributions about the situation in Afghanistan and how it has come to that, and how the Taliban have always been really in service of imperialism. Very nice and very much, and a very extensive list at the end. So we have a lot to discuss and a lot of potential things to work on and create resistance to. So we will move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is sitting next to me here, Oz Karahan. He is going to discuss the NATO-led militarization of the Eastern Mediterranean and fossil imperialism from the point of view of the organization he is from, Union of Cypriots. So Oz is a Cypriot political activist and journalist, the current president of the Union of Cypriots, and the major anti-imperialist movement in Cyprus. And he also writes for Avrupa, the biggest progressive newspaper, which is also a target of the Turkish regime because of its fight for Cypriot liberation. So over to you, Oz. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. First of all, I would like to thank the Resist US-led war movement for invitation. And I would like to salute everyone here and who's watching us online. I'm gonna a little bit talk about the Cyprus related to the East Mediterranean crisis. Because this crisis we are having in the Eastern Mediterranean is continuing for Cypriot people for decades. And right now we have another dimension to this crisis, and that's the fossil imperialism. We experienced colonization, exploitation in every way, but right now we are facing also the fossil imperialism in the region. As you know, Cyprus is, we can say that heart of the Eastern Mediterranean when we consider Egypt, Palestine, Turkey, Greece. It's a island in the middle. And a little bit I will get into the history as well, because that's important. We got our independence in 1960 from Britain, British colonialism. And the anti-imperialist foreign policies of Cyprus was the main reason that 14 years later in 1974, NATO organized actually the Greece and Turkey, by using Greece and Turkey, they organized the US-backed regime in Greece, organized a coup and paved the way for Turkish occupation. Cyprus was the one of the founding member of the non-aligned movement. Since its establishment, had very good relationship with Jamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt, Yugoslavia, India, and always with the anti-imperialist and anti-colonial forces. Yes, yes. And since 1974, these policies, anti-imperialist policies of the Cypriots, punished by the NATO, and half of the island is occupied by Turkey. And in addition to Turkey, in addition to Turkish military, today, in this small island, in the center of Eastern Mediterranean, we have Greek military, British military with their sovereign bases, United States military, and right now, because of the recent developments, French. France has its own bases, naval and air bases in Cyprus. It's a small island. Total population is around 1 million, and we have 5 NATO military in the island today. And on top of that, always in our shores, we have Charles de Gaulle, and the 6th Fleet never left our shores since the Cold War. Basically, Cyprus is an unsinkable aircraft carrier of NATO in the Mediterranean. We have to be understand the US imperialism, we have to, in the region, we have to also look at the enlargement of the NATO after its establishment. Because after its establishment, 3 years later, only 3 years later, the first countries that become member of NATO was Greece and Turkey. And the reason for that, of course, was these two countries had the Bosphorus and the Aegean corridor, which is the only way for Russians, back then Soviets, to reach warm waters. So these two countries, the Greece and Turkey, the historical enemies, got united by United States for the aims of United States. And the Cyprus, which is an island with its population, Greek-speaking population, Greek-speaking Cypriots and Turkish-speaking Cypriots, who were opposing the US policies and the imperialist policies in the region, forced into this triangle, Greece, Turkey, and Cyprus triangle, to be the border post station, the last station of the NATO. And yes, and Another important thing right now I want to point out, and I think as anti-imperialists we have to discuss it, is the new channel that Turkey wants to create next to Bosphorus, that will connect Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And this is an important policy for the imperialists, but as an anti-imperialist, we didn't discuss it yet, but I think we have to talk about it, we have to analyze it, and we have to have positions regarding to it, because it is it's connected with the international law, because Bosphorus has a international law for the ships and the warships passing, and this will affect the international law. We have to discuss it maybe in the groups.
Yes,
that we have to discuss it. And what we are having right now, another important point is to be understand the NATO, how it increases presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. Not only it uses the conflicts between NATO members and the other forces. United States uses the conflicts between the NATO members as well. Greece and Turkey are NATO member, and because of the Eastern Mediterranean, right now they have a problem regarding the sharing the exclusive economic zone. And last year they were almost in the edge of war. And United States, by using this, increase its military bases in Greece. You know, not only the thing, the US uses even the conflicts between NATO members to increase its presence in the region. As a Union of Cypriots, we concentrate the Eastern Mediterranean in three important points. First one is the Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, this triangle. If we don't liberate if we don't liberate these countries from NATO presence, we believe that it is almost impossible to liberate the North Africa and West Asia, because these are the biggest tools for NATO in the region. Second of all, of course, we have to be together with the progressive and socialist forces in the region and with the people in the region. And this is our homework, supporting the people of the region who's witnessing this oppression from the NATO. And third front is right now the fighting against the fossil imperialism and neoliberal policies dictated to the people of the region. Today, as a Cypriot people, we are still fighting to liberate our island from NATO, from the occupiers. And yes, before ending my speech, I would like to say that we have to learn from each other. We have to unite, and we have to fight back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Oz. It was really interesting. I think not enough of us know about the current situation in Cyprus. It's really shocking to hear that there are 5 NATO members having bases in such a small island, and all of the other implications that go with that. And I think we'll definitely continue this discussion in the breakout groups, but we are behind on time, so I'm going to forward us to our next speaker. And I just want to remind those of you online that we will have the questions and answers session at the end, so you can drop your questions already in the Q&A box if you have them, just the chat box. Where we are moving on to our next speaker, who is joining us online from Greece, and that is Lida Dodu from the New Current Left in Greece. Lida was initially active in the educational movement opposing neoliberal reforms in education and the movement that followed the murder of the teenager Krikopoulos by the police in 2008. During the financial crisis and memorandum period, she sat on the board of a students' union. She's also done work in the workers' movement with precarious labor. She's a member of the Committee of National Affairs of the New Left Current for the Communist Liberation, and participated in electoral lists it supported during the last regional and national elections. And Lida, if I'm correct, is going to talk to us about the situation in Greece and the imperialist interventions happening there, such as US bases, etc. Okay, so Lida, over to you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. Hello to everyone participating and attending. So I think the previous speaker gave an idea of how the situation is in Eastern Mediterranean. So I will try to cut off some of the things I've prepared in order to fit to the time. First of all, I would like to start by saying that historically speaking, the American intervention in the region and in Greece in particular goes way back. For example, if one asks most people when the napalm bomb was first used after its perfection, the answer they will most probably get is during the Korean War. However, the first documented use of the napalm bomb was in the post-World War II world, was during the Greek Civil War against the Democratic Army of Greece. That was the military branch of the Communist Party. At the same time, as it was previously said, Greece and Turkey were among the first countries to join NATO, and they were also the first countries to receive called aid from the Marshall Plan, since they were considered to be the most vulnerable to the influence of the Soviet Union. The head of the military junta that governed the country from 1967 till 1974 was trained under the auspices of the CIA, and a few years later, the infrastructure of the port of Salonika up in the north of the country was a focal point for the NATO operation during the Yugoslavian war. In other words, American imperialism in the country is anything but a contemporary phenomenon. Well, regarding the interdependence with NATO, even though the interventions of the US forces in the country and the region do not come as a surprise, there have been new qualitative elements during the past few years related to international relations and the geopolitical position of the Eastern Mediterranean. Especially after the beginning of the war in Syria, the intertwinement of Greece and the USA plans in the region has become deeper. The USA is trying to restrain the influence of its rivals, mostly Russia, in this particular region. This has been evident with its involvement in the former Eastern Bloc, the events in Ukraine, the installation of NATO anti-missile shields, etc. And it exploits the Eastern Mediterranean as a basis in order to expedite militarily, directly or indirectly, against major and minor rivals in the region. In this context, the role of Greece has become more important as the clashes by proxy multiply and the US is in search of safe harbors, both literally and figuratively. So not only does the Greek state provide a never-growing number of ports and infrastructure for the American army, but it also gets involved actively by participating in common exercises and by allocating the second biggest percentage as a share of its GDP to financing its military and to the contribution to NATO. At the same time, both NATO and the Greek army finance special programs in several universities in Greece in order to exploit the public funds and produce applicable technologies having the lowest cost possible, which is yet another evidence of the increasing importance of the militarization in society, along with others such as the exercises of the army in suppressing strikes or riots in refugees camps. So Greece has become more connected to the American policies in the region ever since the Erdogan regime in Turkey turned into an untrustworthy ally for the USA. So since Turkey is regionally a more powerful element than Greece, it sought to exploit the tensions between the USA and its rivals by strengthening its own position, a fact which is extremely evident in the Syrian war as well as the Iranian crisis. These attempts of the Turkish bourgeoisie to detach from the American plans and have an autonomous role in the region, as exhibited, for example, in the act of buying missiles from Russia, caused a deterioration in the relationships between America and Turkey. The short-sighted perception of the Greek bourgeoisie led to an unconditional attachment, consequently, to the American policy in the region, resulting in the policies of the Greek state previously described. One such example of the complete incorporation of Greece into the American plans for dominance in the region is the Prespes Agreement, which renders Greece the hegemonic pole of the agreement, relying on the eagerness of the Macedonian bourgeoisie to attach itself as soon as possible to the American sphere of influence, thus capitulating to the more powerful Greek side at the moment. However, we should keep in mind, and I believe it's a very important point for our discussion, that according to various studies, anti-Americanism is on very high levels in Greece, a fact that hardly comes as a surprise based on the blood toll of that Greece had to pay because of American imperialism. So in order for the Greek state to implement the policies it seeks without major obstructions, it has to keep the people distracted. And the tensions with Turkey provide the perfect justification for the deeper involvement in NATO, while at the same time maintaining the neoliberal policies in the social and economic spheres of life out of the public agenda. And the same is true for the Turkish state, especially during the last years that the Turkish lira has significantly lost its value. Coming now to the Greco-Turkish disputes, several different issues have appeared as scapegoats, justifying the maintenance of the tensions alongside the Greek-Turkish borders. In fact, the issue of borders was one of these issues that caused tensions, and in particular, the designation of exclusive economic zones in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean, a fact which involves Cyprus as well. And the other issue was the deterrence, as it was called, of refugees from entering Greece based on the EU-Turkey agreement, which practically traps refugees in Turkey. Both issues have been of major importance in the public political discourse, while some events of the Evros borders, that is a mass influx of refugees in March 2020 who tried to cross the Greco-Turkish borders, caused the appearance of paramilitary groups, while at the same time, these events became the stage where public figures, from the first woman head of the Greek state to TV personas, really, that was exploited to demonstrate their European identity, thanking Frontex for averting the intrusion of refugees, and so on. Regarding the exclusive economic zones, it has been an issue that caused one of the most intense military preparations in times of peace in recent years in Greece, while it was a constant subject under discussion in the public. And it is important to note that the claims of both the Greek and the Turkish state are irrational, aggressive, as well as to the disadvantage of the people in the region. In particular, the main issue was the exploitation of the gas resources found under the seabed, all the more important now that the EU tries to reduce its energy dependence in Russia. So Greece practically tries to create a continuum between itself, the Republic of Cyprus, which in its view excludes the northern part of the island, thus excluding Turkey as well, and Israel. And it is worth saying that in order for the exclusive economic zones to be designated and exploded, a mutual agreement among the states involved has to be reached, and this was not the case between Greece and Turkey, which never attempted to settle this matter. So our position vis-a-vis this situation, well, first of all, one of the most central demands of the anti-war movement for years in Greece has been to detach the country from the American policies and leave NATO. It is still imperative today. And it's true that there is no other paradigm to align with, since all the countries governed as capitalist democracies have their bourgeoisie interests to serve. And it therefore takes the shift of the entire societal organization in order to be able to safeguard peace and the people's interests. Dividing the sea into properties that are sold is going to bring neither peace nor prosperity to the people. Anyone who considers themselves to be anti-war activists has to be very clear. The race to energy resources mining will only intensify our dependence on fuels, which has been proven multiple times, and all the more so in the past 2 years, that it has caused exhaustion on the planet. And at the same time, mining for the benefit of multinational companies is a recipe for destruction, as has been the case in several countries, such as Nigeria. And if anything, again, the pandemic has taught us that there is an urgent need to change our perception of this world and the way we explode it, while at the same time put the people's and their needs in the center. And instead of spending almost 3% of GDP for military expenses, the Greek state should open up the hospitals that were shut down under EU and IMF instructions and give people ventilators when they need them, instead of making doctors choose who gets to live. So it is essential to capitalize on the technological potential and other factors towards the development of an utterly different energy model, which will dismiss the all-pervasive attack and dominion of the totalitarian capitalism of our times to the four corners of the earth and the biosphere. Thus, we should push ahead with the overall potential for the communist unification of humanity, for a peaceful and fair social development in symbiosis with nature in order to achieve peace. Thank you. Sorry for exceeding the time.
So then we're just going to push on to our next speaker. So we have our final speaker for the plenary session now, and that is Thomas Hofland, sitting next to me, from Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, and he's the coordinator of the Samidoun Netherlands chapter. Samidoun works to organize support for Palestinian prisoners, of which there are currently around 5,000 in Zionist prisons. There are less 6 prisoners since this week. Their work extends to supporting Palestinian resistance in the struggle for liberation and return in many different forms. So they've also been doing investigations and talking and organizing with people around the gas. So Thomas will discuss fossil imperialism in the Eastern Mediterranean relating to Palestine, the Zionist expropriation of Palestinian natural resources, and Palestinian resistance against this. So Thomas, I'm also going to pass you my laptop for the mic. So there you go. The mic is on.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Yasmin. Thank you very much to Resist Europe to invite Samidoun to speak at this launch. We're very happy to be here today to speak alongside Egyptian, Cypriotic, Kurdish, Greek comrades. This is a good opportunity to strengthen the relations between our struggles. To introduce a little bit of Samidoun, we are a Palestinian, Arab, and international organization. So we have chapters in Palestine, in the region, and throughout the whole world, focusing mainly on the Palestinian prisoners and defending their cause and calling for their liberation and being in contact with them to spread also their situation and their struggle outside of the prison bars. I wanted to actually start with what Yasmin hinted at, and that was the glorious escape from prison this week by 6 Palestinian prisoners. And this was this was heroic operation that took many years of planning, and that was a very big boost for the Palestinian prisoners. But I think we have to see it in a broader way, and that it really confronts the myth of Israeli and technological superiority. However $1 million they put into the prison system and the army and the support for the most fascist regimes in Palestine, the Palestinian people, they will find a way to be free. Even though they will be outside of prison, they are still under occupation. They will find a way to end the occupation. No? We will find a way together to do this. And today, actually, there was an important announcement regarding the 6 prisoners, and that I think relates to the subjugation of the region that Mahmoudou was speaking about. Today, the Palestinian Authority announced that they will join Israel in the hunting down of the 6 prisoners.
Yes.
And this is one of the ways that in the region, but I think we can say in the whole world, that they are keeping down the people. Not only by foreign intervention and by foreign soldiers and by foreign capital that being exported to the colonized and oppressed countries, but by using this little strata of rich bourgeoisie in the countries themselves to control the people. You know, when we hear about the story of the Greek comrade, no? Like you even had this government coming, like the Syriza government coming into office with the big promise of making resistance against the EU dictates on Greece. But in the end, what happened to this movement? And maybe even this party is not from the bourgeoisie, but they were capitulated and pressed into a position of being sort of the running dogs for imperialism. And this we see in Palestine today with the Palestinian Authority cooperating with the Zionist entity to hunt down 6 Palestinians who are celebrated by everyone in the country as national heroes. And when we look at this collaboration of the Palestinian Authority with the Zionist regime, and by the way, I'm skipping the whole Zionist colonization of Palestine now because I think this is well ingrained within all of our minds. No? We know about the Zionist colonial project which started at the end of the 19th century and all the wars of aggression it fought against the Palestinians, etc. But when we look at the situation now in Palestine in relation also to the gas, which is an important topic of today's event, it's very important to focus on this normalization with the Zionist state, to see that, you know, like especially with Egypt, no? With the time of Nasser and Arab national liberation movements were active in the whole region. And there was a strong resistance movement in the whole region. And with the Camp David Accords, with the Accords of last year by various Arab governments, regimes, how you want to call them, normalizing with Israel. Now there is, regarding the gas issue, one of the big gas licenses in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Palestinian Sea, which is occupied, so it's exploited by Israel. One of the licenses was now bought by the company from the United Arab Emirates. So now we will have the United Arab Emirates stealing Palestinian gas, benefiting from Palestinian gas. So besides the settler colonialist extraction and exploitation in the region, now they make it into exploitation by people who look like you, by people you might think that, but these people, they work together nationally. No, when we speak and organize in Europe, for some people, it's weird to see that you know, people in Palestine or in the region of Palestine, they are collaborating with the Zionist enemy. But we don't think this is very weird. This is a natural result of their class position. No, this is an important point we have to make here. That there exists a Palestinian and an Arab bourgeoisie who is cooperating completely, fully. Even when prisoners escape from prison, they will mobilize some fascist soldiers to hunt them down. And this is beside the thousands and thousands of Israeli soldiers, of course, who are mobilized to hunt down these 6 prisoners. But I am sure that these 6 prisoners, they are getting help of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and they are supported by their people, and they will be victorious. Either way, whatever will happen to them, they have made victory, and they will keep this victory. Then in relation of confronting a problem like this fossil imperialism, which happens in relation to the gas in Palestine and in the whole East Mediterranean, I think when Mamadou was speaking about the rise of the Islamic movement, in the region, I think this is a very important analysis we have to make, and we have to delve very deep into this. And at the same time, we have to see it also very much in relation to the decline of the left. And this is because, like, we had the Samidoun delegation last month to Lebanon to visit the Palestinian camps there, to speak and meet with organizations we have been working with in the camps, to build a relation with the Palestinian and Lebanese resistance there. There is strong Lebanese nationalist Islamic resistance in Lebanon. And we see this as a very important and strong force in the region. At the same time, we have to build a strong left resistance in Palestine, in Lebanon, and also in Europe, because this decline of the left in the Arab region, this is much part of the decline of the left in most of the world. So we have to rebuild this movement, because every other way that has been tried to fight against imperialism, fight for national liberation, and even some examples of this from the left, it has failed ultimately, even after some decades of successes. Even when we look at the Arab nationalist movement from the last century, at some point it started failing. And this happened too with the left projects, the big left projects that have happened in the Soviet Union, in China.
We have to discuss this point deeply.
Yes, this is we cannot, I just have a couple of minutes to touch upon it, but it's important to make a very deep analysis of these questions. But especially, I want to conclude a bit with going back to this building a resistance and the gas issue. Because as much as the finding, the discovery of the gas and the exploitation that is now happening, and by the way, the exporting of this gas by Israel to Jordan, to Egypt, to Europe, they want to export it to. So they want to make European homes stay warm in the winter on stolen Palestinian gas, paid for by Palestinian blood. And this is something that we have to oppose. And there is a movement growing. We know all about the big climate movement that is growing in all of the world. And we know that this is, every social movement is in a natural way connected to the Palestinian struggle as well. Because all the struggles are present inside the Palestinian story, in the Palestinian struggle. Not only gas, when we think of water, how much water Israel is stealing from under the West Bank to feed its settler population, to make nice gardens and nice agriculture while the Palestinians are suffering. But when we speak about these forms of exploitation, They are not only exploitation, they also provide opportunities for resistance. And we saw this in the last uprising in Palestine in May. Because what happened to the huge gas drilling platforms just off the coast of Palestine? They were a target. They are a big target, no? And we have to see that through both popular mobilizations in Jordan, the boycott committee in Jordan, they make very big and strong actions against this normalization and importing of Zionist and stolen Palestinian gas. This is very important. And at the same time, we recognize the very practical way of these kind of installations being a target for resistance. This is the natural result when people are being exploited, when they are not having their own self-determination over the natural resources. So we say clearly that no one should participate in buying the stolen Palestinian gas. No one should cooperate with the Zionists on this point, and it should be completely under control of the Palestinian population. And they can do with the gas whatever they want. If they want to use it, if they want to keep it in the ground, if they want to export it, they are the ones who can choose. So I want to really conclude with supporting the point of Lida that there is a strong anti-American sentiment in Palestine, but I think it's even growing inside Europe. We should ride this wave of anti-imperialist sentiment that is coming from seeing all the war images on the TV daily. People know which wars are happening in the world. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And we should ride on this wave, support the anti-imperialist struggle, and fight for the liberation of all the people who are also represented here tonight, and the people in all the other countries around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for that very nice contribution, covering a lot of different things. And I think in the end, like the message of riding on the wave of the anti-American sentiment that is growing as more and more of the masses realize that that things are not good, and that the war, that US war is really destroying countries, plundering resources, and enough is enough.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Rhonda Ramiro with the Resist US-Led War Movement. I'll be facilitating our breakout group discussion today. Maybe before we get started, we could just take a short moment to introduce ourselves. Since we aren't all in person, it may be good to hear everybody's names and perhaps where you are joining us from. So I'm Rhonda. I am with the Secretariat of the Resist US-Led War Movement, and I'm based in the United States in California. So maybe if we take the first question that Monique was asking, and thinking about Lida, maybe this is a good one for you about, why US and NATO have such an emphasis on the Eastern Mediterranean. I think you covered a bit of that during your talk earlier, but maybe this is a good chance to kind of expound upon that. And any successful organizing that New Left Current or other allies of yours in the area have been able to conduct on resisting this increased US militarization and the bases in the area. So.
Well, first of all, I think historical regions bear their importance in the US trying to set foot as deeply as possible in the region. Of course, its geopolitical importance being on the crossroads of several natural resources and paths to different countries. But I think we should zoom out a bit and see the United States of America attempt to secure itself and the bases it already has before entering the eastern part of Europe, or before advancing to Asia. And I think if we zoom out and look from the top, from the north to the south, we will see that the USA is trying to create a continuum from the former Soviet republics till the Suez Canal, really, in order to obstruct as much as possible Russia or any other opponents it has in the region. Of course, the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean is it provides an easy access with the lowest possible cost, because it takes much more effort to maintain troops on another country, on some land, rather than have your fleet flying and dispatching where it's necessary while carrying what you need at the time the most. So I think that's why Cyprus has 5 different NATO armies, including the Greek one, because it's practically a boat in the sea that renders easier the military expeditions.
Yeah. Great. Does anybody else want to comment on that question about the importance of the region and the interests, I think, at play? Some of the questions that the organizers of the conference were interested in us talking about here also were around campaigns. So campaign tactics, campaign strategies to oppose US militarism, in the past or even ongoing now. And I think it also gets a little bit at Monique's question about, how do we build this international solidarity to oppose US and NATO designs in the area and really around the world. So wondering if we can open it up here to thoughts that folks have about those questions, successful campaigns, and then the building of international solidarity.
May I say a couple of thoughts?
Sure.
I think we need a diversified strategy for that. For example, during the Yugoslavian war, there was an actual blockade of the trucks that were trying to reach the port of Salonika that would later on be transferred. They transferred ammunition that would be transported to Yugoslavia. And the unions and people and activists and organizations formed a human shield so that this ammunition wouldn't proceed further on to bomb people or be used against people. Of course, that couldn't happen at all the times during the whole duration of the operations in the Yugoslavian war. However, it was important, and I remember as a child attending to that with my parents. So it was a unanimous participation on behalf of the society that this war is unjust and we should do our best to stop it. Of course, ever since the anti-war movement has suffered some losses, let's say, but I think that there is a need to actively stop the movement itself of the troops when that's possible, when and where that's possible, and also propagate to the people, I think, the first speaker made that point that sometimes we don't make the connection between imperialism and war. We think imperialism is an abstract notion that basically refers to someone else and doesn't affect us. If we make the connection, then it's easier to engage the entirety of the society. And that's actually one very important point that I would like to make about military preparation that I mentioned in my speech, and other speakers did too, about a couple of years ago, that the tensions between Greece and Turkey reached a peak, really. And it was an intervention both in and out of the army. It was because supposedly Greece has a defense dogma, so the army is not supposed to be out of the country's borders participating in aggressive wars. So it was the participation of the people in uniform there who have to have the service in the army, and the participation of unions outside the army that said we have nothing to against our Turkish brothers and sisters just across that shore. And this is, I believe, one of the major events that somehow stopped or restrained a bit the possibility of war between Greece and Turkey at that point.
Thank you. Yeah, I think about some successful campaigns that have happened in the Asia Pacific. So part of the organization I'm also with is Bayan USA, which is a alliance of Filipino organizations affiliated with the Bayan Multisectoral National Democratic Alliance back home in the Philippines. And some of the successful campaigns against militarism, the one that stands out was the movement to kick the U.S. military bases out of our country for decades, but leading up to the 1990s, when there was the combination of people in the streets protesting, and then united front work with elected officials who were able to be persuaded to push for the ending of a military bases treaty, or allow the expiration of this military bases treaty, so that the US's ability to have bases physically on the islands, was terminated. And so it signified, the end of the U.S. being able to officially have bases in the country. Now, of course, there's new ways that the U.S. has returned, new kinds of agreements that allow the U.S. to use the Philippine military's bases and occupy those for U.S. use. So they're virtually, back. Have been back in the country, just under the guise of visiting forces agreement, no longer with formal U.S. bases, but it was the combination of the people in the streets, those actions, and then really compelling people in Congress to act by pushing for the military bases treaty to be allowed to expire. So that's one thing. And then, another one of our resists war partners in Japan has talked a lot about the different actions that they take. Really, there's actions happening on a daily basis in Okinawa against the large U.S. military bases that are there, and against the construction of new bases. And a lot of that is, again, creative actions, kind of like what Lita was saying earlier, where you have people forming a human chain in different parts to prevent the transport of construction materials and vehicles to different parts of Okinawa, to prevent the construction of a new U.S. Marine base there. And then they've even talked about how they have people who go out in boats into the waters where the construction is supposed to happen, and they conduct their demonstrations using boats to try and block the construction of new military facilities there as well. So I think the constant action and protests of people will really be essential. And you know, like many of the speakers have said today, you know, we have to rebuild that anti-war movement, you know, rebuild people, and grow and strengthen people's creative and militant actions against this growing militarism in the area. But that's what's going to make the difference in stopping the expansion of US and NATO militarism in the region and you know, in the world.
I think it would be interesting if someone could contribute by presenting the view of someone who is in less advanced place in this chain of imperialism and internationalism compared to Greece. Because, for example, I recognize, and we collectively in New Left Current recognize, that Greece had its fair share in imperialism in the Balkans, especially, particularly before the crisis, but even after that. So we understand that, okay, American imperialism has been had a quite strong foothold in the country, but we have done, I mean, the Greek state has done the same where it could, and Macedonia, for example, was an example, or the stance of governments vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue has been such an example of changing coalitions and following the Israeli and, by extension, the American policies in the region. So I think it would be interesting if someone who came for a country that, to put it simply, has suffered more, was to provide an insight on how things look from that side.
Hello, everyone. In our little group discussion, we mainly discussed the strategy. Okay. In our discussion, we mainly discussed the strategy of the anti-imperialist movement around the world, and most importantly in the Western world. So we looked at past movements like the anti-Vietnam War, and we try to look at what are the lessons we can learn from it. And from anti-imperialist movement, so what we've basically seen is we need to build a sustainable organization, sustainable anti-imperialist organization. And how do we do that? We should by giving a correct anti-imperialist line, we already get really far. I mean, the analysis is really important in the message, but most importantly right now is how do we reach the people? How do we reach the people and make the people anti-imperialists themselves? So basically the two things we discussed are who are we going to reach to and how. So the most important thing is to reach the youth, because the youth are the future, and they are a very powerful force. If we can actually get a strong anti-imperialist culture into the youth, the movement will grow immensely. And how do we do that? By linking imperialism to climate change, because of imperialist exploitation, our planet is breaking down. And imperialist wars. Those are just abstract concepts in the minds of youth in the Netherlands or in other Western countries. So how do we show them that imperialist exploitation is bad? By showing them how it will kill them. Right now, imperialism is killing people in the so-called third world, but tomorrow we will die. Not necessarily because of drone strikes, but because of flooding in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Germany. So show them that climate change will kill us, and climate change is caused by imperialism. So show them that imperialism is going to kill us all, so we have to kill imperialism first. And basically our message is imperialism is death, so death to imperialism.
Great, thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. Yeah, first of all, I personally, and I hope others thought as well, that we had a pretty diverse group of people with different views and backgrounds. We had comrades from Samidoun, from Revolutionaire Eenheid. Yeah, of course. My apologies. We had people from Samidoun, from Revolutionaire Eenheid, from RE, we had Belgian Friends of Korea. We had multiple Filipino comrades. So we had Belgian people, Egyptian people, Filipino people, and Dutch people, and that made a very enriching environment for discussion. We mainly talked, well, we actually only talked about the first question, which was, talking about successful tactics in the past and what we can learn from these. We talked about the current situation in Afghanistan, how the retreat of American troops was achieved, and whether this could be considered a triumph or not. Building off of that, we also discuss more generally Islamic movements and the role they play in anti-imperialism, whether they contribute or merely distract from our common goals. Let's see. Yeah, we also talked about the importance of mass organization in general, also to enable mass mobilization, like Helen added, that when you organize, people can come together very quickly in times of need. And organization also helps to establish more sustainable revolutionary movements, because once you take power, then you do need some sort of leadership and organization in order to not have it all break down within a very short while. I think the main things we talked about. If I missed anything, feel free to correct me. So yeah, we mainly talked very in depth about that. Oh, and also I missed something, I'm sorry. We also talked about secularism and the role that it plays within liberation and emancipation. And yeah, I thought it was a very interesting point of view and a very interesting and fruitful discussion. So I want to thank all my group mates for this discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me to speak for closing. I wasn't sure if this is necessary. I think we had a very good program today, very successful. We with distancing, we filled the room, I think. I don't know how many were online, but there are a number of points that I think are important to emphasize. One, that US war is necessary to exploit the world. And I think this forum has created a clear understanding of the foundation why you need war. And the US, a power that is now facing a multipolar world, from being, the sole hegemon, now the US has to contend with other powers in a multipolar world. But at the same time, it is important for them to continue to conduct war so that they continue to exploit, including the question of natural resources in the Mediterranean Sea, the oil in the Middle East. Up to now, the question of oil, which is still to now, actually, Iraq remains the main, the biggest source of oil. And therefore, the Middle East is important for the US, even though the US has a pivot to China, because there is a question, the need for the US also to control the resources in the economy in the Far East. In this forum, we were able to raise a number of points, and I think it's also important for us to highlight the role of the main partners of US imperialism. Of course, we start with the European Union, and with the European Union and the NATO. It's very important for them not only to ensure the subjugation of the neighborhood, the West Asia and North Africa, but also for the European Union, which wants the resources in the neighborhood. Second, I think it's important to highlight the role of the fascist, militarist governments that is called Israel, the government of Erdogan in Turkey, and also, of course, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which has become the main partners of the US in controlling the region. But at the same time, it continues to develop other puppet governments around the Middle East. For us, I think an important question for us is the need to support the struggle for self-determination and liberation. And it came out, of course, in this forum. On one hand, the struggle of the Palestinian people, the Kurdish people, and also the people in Egypt, in Cyprus, Greece, and others who are fighting imperialism and to achieve genuine liberation. For all of us, it's important. For many of us who are facing semi-feudal and semi-colonial countries in the Middle East and in rest of the world, we are now facing governments that are either openly feudal or are actually semi-feudal. And at the same time, there is a need to achieve national and social liberation, whether in the Middle East and Europe. And in that sense, RESIST is a very important network. The discussion showed that there's an importance to have a common or to develop a common understanding and analysis of imperialism and the situation around the world. There's also a need to strengthen our organizing, especially among the young. And finally, to strengthen our cooperation across different aspects of activities, our propaganda, our mass movement, our mass actions. And for that, I think this has been a very successful event for Resist. And I think we're going to have much, much more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, for those closing words. I think you rounded it up wonderfully, and indeed, a lot of good things have come out of this session, and the work begins here with Resist Europe. We are a new organization. We are recruiting member organizations and members to the network so that we can work on the issues that we discuss together, so we can create more unity, so we can collaborate actions and heighten our anti-imperialist resistance on all fronts. I think that's it for this evening. So I want to firstly, I just have to do my thank yous, because tonight would not have happened without the efforts of many very hardworking people. So thank you everyone here in this room. Very grateful for you to be here. Very nice to be together in a political event. Thank you to our speakers, Mamdou, Oz, Lida and Thomas, and hopefully we'll hear from Nullifer. A big thank you to the Global Secretariat and the comrades in the US for all the support in bringing this forum to fruition. Thank you to all the Resist Europe coordinators for all their efforts. And a very warm and heartfelt thank you to the tech team for making this hybrid format possible. I said your name right? It's so short, that's why. But yes, it's been like big appreciation for being able to reach all of you around the world from our conference room in Belgium. And for those here in this room, I said already, we can continue with some drinks and have more time to chat, because I think there's still a lot left to be said. And we'll see some of you at Manifesta. But with that, we're going to close out the Zoom. Thank you again. Resist imperialism, ibaksak. That I don't have any chance to finish off it really, but just thank you all.